All right, let's just jump right into it here with a tier list for 1 and 2 cost. The basic idea here is that the higher a unit is in this tier list, the more likely you're going to want to hold it in stage 1 and stage 2. The lower it is, the more likely you're going to want to sell it, either because it doesn't belong in any meta openers for the patch, or because the unit itself is quite weak. I'm going to give a couple of examples of different openers. They are not provided or shown in order of strength. They're just different examples here. Starting off with Honeymancer plus Hunter, you really need to have both Kog'Maw and Nunu for this to work. It will not work with Ziggs, will not work with Veigar because you'll have too many backline units. So it needs to be Blitzcrank, Nunu, and Kog'Maw, and then you just match the Kog'Maw with a Hunter unit. There's actually quite a few different Hunter openers that you can play around. Another one here is with Vanguard, and with the Vanguard opener, you can actually also play around Frost here, which can be quite good. The main idea is that Frost soldiers have quite a bit of HP in the early game relative to the amount of damage that different units are doing in stage 2. So Frost can be quite good early game. You also have this Hunter Shapeshifter line that's quite good, especially if you have both Nomsy and Shyvana. Of course, you can play any Shapeshifters and Hunters in those slots, but it's particularly good if you have these two. The Portal Opener, still very good. The best unit to splash in here is Nico, but of course it doesn't have to be Nico here. It could be any Vanguard unit. Any Shapeshifter is good here. Even Ahri can be good here for Scholar if you have an upgraded Jace for good frontline. So Portal Opener, still quite good. You can also play around the Multistriker Opener. Now, one thing I'll note about the Multistriker Opener is that Akali is quite weak as a unit. So if you're playing multi-strikers, you really want to have Kassadin or Hecarim. But if you do have those units, the multi-striker opener is quite strong. Next up, we have the standard Bastion Scholar opener, playing around Ahri, Zoe with Poppy, Lillia in the front line. Also, if you are able to find a Hecarim here, that can be quite good. You don't have to play this into Bastion Ahri. You don't have to reroll this. It can just be a good AP opener and lead you into other compositions. Then we have the Mage opener. So the Mage opener used to be a meme, but they buffed both Soraka and Seraphine. I'm not totally sure which of these two units is better in terms of itemization. I've generally seen people itemize Seraphine, but I've also seen a couple of people itemize Soraka, and it's looked quite good. So something to keep in mind. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the niche openers that generally you're pretty much never going to see. You need to play exactly these 5 units, in my opinion, to make Ziggs work. Anything else, and Ziggs is kind of lackluster because he just misses so often. Of course, if you have enough upgrades on your board, you can make Ziggs work, but it is a little frustrating playing him. I think this is his best shell or his best opener, but most of the time you're not really looking to play around Ziggs. And then this last opener here, again, not something you're playing around most of the time. Eldritch opener in general has gotten weaker because Ashe is basically not a unit without Multistriker. She effectively needs Multistriker to do any damage at all. And then Elise without Shapeshifter is kind of meh, and so you kind of want this Mordekaiser here. And then they also nerfed Akali, so you're really relying on the strength of Nilah, Kassadin, and maybe the Ashe if you have good items for her. So yeah, generally speaking, this is not something you're going to play, but it can be good if you high roll it. All right, next up, we have the first item slam tier list. So this is a ranking of how these items feel as your very first item of the game. So this isn't saying that, you know, for example, Giant Slayer is worse than every other item in the game. We're not saying that at all. What I am saying is that Giant Slayer is pretty much never going to be an item that you want to slam first. So, and that's true of every single item here in D tier. Whereas the items in S tier are pretty much always going to get slammed if you feel like you have any unit that can use them. Most of the time you're going to be slamming these items. So there's a couple of factors that go into why these items are ranked the way they are. First of all is how good they are in the early game. For example, Ginsu's Rageblade is an incredible item in the early game, maybe a little bit less so in the late game, but fights tend to go very long in the early game, and it's pretty versatile. You can pretty much put it on any carry and it will do a good job. So Ginsu's Rageblade, phenomenal, gives direction. Generally speaking, going to be an item that you're looking to slam early on. Gargoyle Stoneplate, for example, is a very good item economy type item. So if you get Chain plus Cloak, you're pretty much always going to be slamming Gargoyle because there's not a whole lot that you can be doing with those components other than Gargoyle. Whereas something like Redemption is in C tier, not because it's a bad tank item. In fact, arguably it's a better tank item than Gargoyle, but Redemption uses Belt plus Tier, and when you get Belt plus Tier opener, you're probably going to be angling something that's a little bit more AP centric. For example, you might want to go for a Spear of Shojin or Blue Buff on Carousel and then try to play around Morello, which would be a much better opener than having just a tank item. You'd have a lot more direction and you'd know what you're doing. So when you look at this item item tier list, just keep in mind that there are several things that are being factored in. The strength of the item as the very first item on a carry is a factor. So Rageblade and Spear of Shojin, very good as the first item. Infinity Edge and Jeweled Gauntlet, a lot less so. Also Hextech Gunblade, same thing. We're also looking at item economy. So we talked about that with Redemption or something like Steadfast, for example, where you know that Chain is always a defensive item, and in a lot of compositions, Glove is not that good. So Steadfast is a great way to kill that Glove and kill the Chain and still get a pretty good item out of the deal. And then also just the overall strength of an item. For example, Nashor's Tooth got nerfed recently. It is, in my opinion, now an understated item, so it's not as good as it used to be. It actually used to be a little bit higher in this tier list, and now it's a little bit lower because unfortunately, it's not what it used to be. So as a first item, not really that good. So that's how you should be thinking about this tier list. Hopefully that helps with your early game slams. The last thing of note here is that on the far right of each tier, these are the double component items. So you have your red buff, your Warmogs, double tier, double rod, so on and so forth. In fact, you could argue Bramble would be in D tier, but if you get 2 chains, how else are you killing them? Deathblade is a phenomenal item, but item economy wise, usually you would be better off building something like BT plus Sterix, so you usually don't get to build Deathblade in a lot of games. Yeah, hopefully this helps with your early game slams in terms of understanding what you should be aiming for, what gives good direction, and what's good for item economy purposes. All right, so I'm trying something a little bit different for this patch where I have put together this flowchart that hopefully should help you identify not only what the best compositions are, but when to play them. So I have different start points and different conditions that you need to meet in order to play a composition, as well as the tier as usual in terms of how strong that composition is, if you do have a good spot for it. And as I go through each of these different openers here, which we will go through each of these one by one, hopefully it makes a little bit sense in terms of how you should play the patch. Let me know what you feel about this. If you are interested in the flowchart itself, it is available in my Discord, which you can find a link to in the description of this video. Let's start by talking about the Rageblade Opener and the 4 main different compositions that you can lean towards from a Rageblade. So there are 2 conditional ones and then 2 non-conditional ones. The 2 non-conditional ones are Kalista Flex and Shapeshifter Blasters. Generally speaking, you're going to favor Kalista Flex because it is less reliant on hitting 5 cost on level 8, whereas Shapeshifter Blasters really wants to be able to hit Smolder if you slammed a Rageblade. And then the conditional ones, you have Jinx, Wukong, and Multistriker Reroll. Let's start off with Multistriker Reroll since that one's a little bit simpler. So if you're playing Multistriker Opener, you have a lot of copies of Jax and Ashe, and you're more likely to lean towards this. When it comes to Jinx Wukong, the reason I say strong early is this is a 3-cost reroll. This condition is true for all 3-cost reroll. If you lose streak in stage 2 and 3 when playing 3-cost reroll, you usually end up having to roll a lot in stage 4 to stabilize. And then you also end up losing anyway to a lot of the standard level 8 boards. So you end up forced to go all in on 4-5 a lot of times if you aren't strong early, and that's simply just too soon, especially if you had to roll deep on 4-1 to be able to realistically hit your 3 stars. So pretty much all 3-cost reroll wants to be strong early. And then also Jinx Wukong, you're playing Wukong, you need to make sure you're able to get gargoyles, otherwise he simply is not a unit. Now let's cover each one of these compositions in a little bit more detail, starting off with Kalista Flex. This is the standard level 8 board that you're looking to play. And a couple of things of note here. So when it comes to your augments, you're looking to take econ augments or something like Fortune or Golden Quest. This is a comp that caps very, very high. So the more resources you have, the better. You have a lot of units to itemize, and you have a lot of expensive units to play, which means you need a lot of gold to be able to hit the composition. The max cap here is to replace Jax with Camille, replace Nico with Morgana, and then level up for Briar. You're not going to get to this max cap all that often, but when you do, you will usually win the game. Next up, we have the Shapeshifter Blasters. So this is very reliant on being able to hit Smolder on level 8 if you slammed a Rageblade. Otherwise, you're playing around Varus. And of course, Varus is weaker than Smolder when you have that Rageblade. If you have something like Spider Queen, this composition is S tier, but otherwise, generally speaking, is not going to cap as high as Kalista Flex and is a little bit more dependent on the exact units you're able to hit. Next up here, we have the Multistriker reroll. So Multistriker reroll, you have 2 main options. You have the 1-cost option, which is Jax plus Ashe, and then you also have the 2-cost option, which is Kassadin plus Akali. I have generally found the 1-cost option being a little bit better lately, especially after the nerfs to Akali. She just doesn't scam as many fights anymore, so it does feel noticeably weaker. Another win condition was added to the comp where Hecarim was buffed in many ways. He was given more HP, a lower mana cost, more damage, and they buffed his 3+ Arcana bonus. So if you're able to get towards Hecarim 3, that is a win condition. Also, Hecarim 2 is very strong and worth itemizing. And then lastly here for the Rageblade Opener, we have Jinx Wukong. This has been around for a while now. There are still some very strong augments that you can play around, such as Category 5, Hunting Frenzy, Shimmer Scale Essence, and Spin to Win. You're looking for Rageblades and bow items on Jinx. You're looking for Gargoyles plus any really... It doesn't matter what this third item is. It can be anything. BT, I think, is performing the best, but it can be a third Gargoyle. It can be a Declaw. It can be a Redemption. It could be a Warmogs. It could be Adaptive. Really, it doesn't matter what that third item is. And then all your sword items go on to Olaf. If you are able to meet the item requirements for this comp, you will probably do quite well. All right, next up, we have the AD opener without a Rageblade. So you have a couple different options here. Well, and by a couple, I mean literally a couple. 2 options. One is you can play towards 6 Shapeshifters and Blasters. This is more leaning towards playing around Varus rather than Smolder. Not very good, to be honest with you. And then you also could play towards Kog'Maw if you have a good augment for it, or if you have a lot of units that are part of the reroll comp. So let's start off with the Kog'Maw Reroll here. You've seen it a couple of times before. It's been the same since the start of the set. This is best in slot for Sweet Tooth. That's the hero augment for Nunu. This is best in slot for Zap Attack, which is the hero augment for Blitzcrank. This is not best in slot for Molten Caramel because you probably should not be playing this line if you do get Molten Caramel. There's a separate line for that, which we'll cover a little bit later on in the video. And then here is your best in slot for Kog'Maw. You're usually looking to get Shojin plus Last Whisper. Last item, a lot less important. Also, red buff has been getting a lot more popular on Kog'Maw. That's quite good as well. And then Tristana just wants as many bow items as possible, and that's mainly it for Kog'Maw. Max cap is playing around Arcana, so just be mindful of that. And then we already showed this 6 Shapeshifter line before. The main difference here is that you're looking to play around Varus a little bit more than Smolder because you don't have the Rageblade. It's a lot weaker if you don't have Rageblade Smolder, but you could also just play around full AD Smolder. It is what it is. Generally speaking, though, you're not too happy if you're playing around AD without a Rageblade. All right, next up, we have the AP opener and the different lines that you can angle based on that AP opener. There are 2 non-conditional compositions and then 2 conditional ones. The non-conditional comps are Arcana Ryze and Karma Preservers. When it comes to which of those 2 you should play, first of all, pick based on which one's uncontested, but also Karma is a little bit more expensive than Arcana Ryze. It's more reliant on being able to hit 5 costs, so the richer you are, the better Karma Preservers is. Also, if you have a blue buff, Karma is better. The more rods you have, Arcana Ryze becomes a little bit better since he really wants AP items. Then we have Vex Veigar, so with all 3-cost reroll compositions, you want to make sure that you're strong in stage 2 and 3. That means you're winning most of your rounds so that you have the HP to stay above 50 gold in stage 4. And then lastly here we have Bastion Ahri. If you notice for Kog'Maw, I said you needed either a good augment or a lot of copies of the units in the reroll composition. When it comes to Bastion Ahri, I feel like you need both. You need both a good augment and a lot of copies of the units. Otherwise, it's hard to play. In fact, I would argue the augment is more important than strictly the number of units that you have. Now, let's go into each of these comps in more detail, starting off with Arcana Ryze. Same concept as always. You're trying to pair Arcana with portal units because there's good crossover between those different synergies. First of all, with this Diana here, this can be a Taric. Most of the time, it will be a Taric because Taric 2 is better than Diana 1. So the max cap is with Diana, but most of the time you're going to be playing around Taric. And when it comes to Ryze itemization, again, as much AP as possible, plus anti-heal. They did buff Nami's damage, so she's a little bit better with AP items, but in general, you're looking to itemize her with mana generation plus any utility items like Shiv or Morello if you don't already have that on Ryze. And then, of course, Nora is very strong. Play her the second that you're able to find her. Until then, you'll probably have to play around Vex as a frontline mage. Next up, we have the Karma Preservers composition. So this is the weak version of it on level 8. This is where you don't have any 5 cost, so you can play around Shapeshifters here with Nico plus Swain or Nico plus Nasus, depending on how much gold you have. And then eventually you're looking to move this into the Preservers, which would be Morgana, and then also Milio in the backline. This is the ideal level 8 board, but you'll notice that this board is just as expensive as the level 9 board for Arcana Ryze. So most of the time you're not going to be able to hit this, and you're going to have to play around the Shapeshifters. When it comes to Augments, it's basically the same as Kalista Flex. It is a standard level 8 board with a very high cap, so things like Fortune and Golden Quest are quite strong. Next up here, we have Vex Veigar. It is the same as last patch. The only thing that's different is they nerfed the AP scaling on Charms bot for Veigar. So that is like a major change for the composition. It means that your Veigar will do a significant amount more damage with 7 Mage. I still don't think it's worth playing 2 Reverse Fawns, but if you do have a Mage +1, you should be looking to play 7 Mage. And again, it's the same thing in terms of how to fill out the rest of the composition. You're usually looking to cap around the Arcana, so that would be your Tahm Kench, Hecarim, and Xerath. And then you also have the option of capping out around the Honeymancer plus Portal. But the main idea here is that you're pretty much always looking to play around the Portal with Taric, and then you want to get Arcana with Xerath on the board. So something like this can be quite strong as well. And then of course, again, be mindful of the fact that 7 Mage is stronger than it was in prior patches, so getting that Mage emblem can be pretty good, and 7 Mage is a good thing that you can play around before you're able to find Xerath. And then finally here, when it comes to AP openers, we have Ahri Bastion, or Bastion Ahri. It's the same as it's always been, but it's weaker now because, again, they nerfed Ahri. It is what it is. You can play around with the hero augments, so these are best in slot for Lillia and Poppy. The big thing when it comes to Lillia is you're looking for Bloodthirster plus one of these 2 items, and then the ideal one is the other one. So like if you have BT plus Crown Guard, then you want to get Ionic Spark. If you have BT plus Ionic, you want to get Crown Guard. But there are other items that are acceptable as well, such as Warmogs, that you can play instead of one of these. And then when it comes to Poppy here, there's a lot of ways to itemize her. You can have IE, you can have Titans, you can have double healing with Hodge, but you're really just looking for any of those melee bruiser items, and you're looking to tempo this as far as you can. So again, big thing when it comes to this composition is you really do want to have a good augment. It can be a hero augment, it can be upgraded adventure, it could be prismatic ticket, it can be a component buffet, but you need to have a good augment on 2-1 realistically to be able to play this. All right, next up, we have the melee opener and the different ways you can angle this. There are 3 main compositions here. First of all, we have Warriors. This is a standard level 8 composition. You're playing around Gwen, Fiora, and ideally Katarina 3. That would be the big cap for that comp. Then you have the Multistrikers. We've talked about this before. 2 main ways of playing it with the 1 cost and the 2 cost. You have your Jax, Kassadin, and Hecarim as melee carries. And then lastly, we have the 2 cost reroll version of Warriors. This has gotten a lot weaker in this patch. I have it down here in B tier. I would generally only play this if I got a good augment for it, and I already had some number of copies of Nilah's early on. So generally speaking, you're not looking to play this. We've already talked about multi-strikers. I've mentioned this already. So again, your carries here can be Kassadin, Jax, and Hecarim for melee items, especially if you're able to get them onto Hecarim 3. That can be very strong. Next up, we have a new composition that we haven't talked about before. This is 4 warriors, and the standard is actually the level 7 board without the Arcana units. So this is kind of like your perfect shell. And then you're looking to add the Arcana units on level 8. Ideally, it's Xerath, so you can start getting the Xerath charms, but TK is quite strong as well. And the max cap here is being able to hit Katarina 3 with something like Find Your Center is absurd. This augment is bugged currently and giving double the amount of damage amp from what it's supposed to be giving. And Katarina is absurd if you're able to get this set up and some really good items onto her. But regardless, if you have a lot of melee carry items, this is something you should be angling towards. And then we have the 2-cost reroll version of Warriors. Again, a lot weaker than it was before because of the nerf that they made to Akali. She just doesn't really do as much anymore. The comp is not as stable anymore in stage 3 like it used to be. So generally speaking, unless you have a really good spot for this, I would generally just stick to the standard warrior composition and only play this again if you get something really good like one of these augments on the right side. All right, next up we have the +1 emblems. These are the 3 main ones that you should pay attention to. Of course, there are other options as well, but I consider them to be less viable. When it comes to Fairy and Witchcraft, you'll see the stats on those are pretty good, but that's reliant on hitting +2. You need 2 of them to make them work, whereas these, you only need one to really make them quite strong. So we have Portal, Sugarcraft, and Frost. Portal and Sugarcraft are both S tier, Frost is A tier. So when it comes to Portal, you've seen this before. It's the same as it's always been. You're looking to cap around 8 Portal with Diana on level 9. Of course, this can be a little bit difficult to get to. The main thing is you're looking to play 3 Mage here with Nami, and some other +1s that you can consider instead of Diana are Nico, if you have Jace on your board still, which ideally you don't. Also, Rumble can be quite good. Really anything, also Tom Kench as well. Anything that fills out a trait on your board can be fine as that +1, but this is the absolute max cap for Portal. Then we have the Sugarcraft +1. This is a new composition for this particular patch. The big thing here is you're putting the Sugarcraft emblem onto Fiora, and you're sort of playing it similar to Karma Preservers, except now you're just playing around more Sugarcraft units. And so you have your Gwen, you have your Fiora, and you're just playing Preservers and Sugarcraft units. Pretty straightforward. If you get any item augments, very strong with this, especially something like Blinding Speed, since it will help you fully itemize Jinx. And then lastly here we have Frost. This is the same as it was for last patch. So you're looking to play around Varus as your primary carry in the backline. You could put this Frost emblem on either Nasus or Varus. If you actually look at the stats, it's not that great on Varus, but usually you're just going to go ahead and put it on him for item economy purposes so that you can get 3 item Varus, 3 item Nasus, and 3 item Olaf, and eventually start building items on Diana. So usually it's best to put it on him. But if you truly have infinite items, you might want to consider going for a different item here that's even stronger than Frost +1, but usually that's more than good enough. And then when it comes to Olaf, GS is very good. I said last time it's because he got stuck on the front line. One of the major reasons GS is so good is because you want to just kill a unit as quickly as possible so that you're able to get this Frost proc as soon as possible. Also, Ionic Spark is good, even if you don't have Diana, just because of the fact that the Frost soldiers do magic damage, which makes the shred from Ionic Spark quite good. All right, next up we have hero augments. I'm not even looking forward to recording this because there's just so many of them. And even worse than the fact that there's so many of them, they also have multiple lines you can play. Several of them do, at least. So let's start off with the ones that really only have one main line that you would play. Molten Caramel, this is the Rumble hero augment. There is a specific composition for that, which we'll show. Also, Deja Vu, same idea. There is a specific composition that you'll play with it, and you'll pretty much never play anything else. Witchy Wallop usually is played with Bastion Ahri, but you can play it with Witchcraft, especially if you have an emblem. But this is somewhat reliant on being able to find Morgana, so you need to be pretty far ahead of tempo in order to play that. And then Spider Queen is pretty much always played with 6 Shapeshifters or more with Blasters in the backline. So these are pretty straightforward. If you get them, you just play that comp. But when it comes to the remaining hero augments here, you have multiple lines that you can play. So with Sweet Tooth and Nunu, you can play around Kog'Maw. That is standard. But you can also play around this Bastion Honeymancer line, which is quite strong. For Zap Attack, this is the Blitzcrank augment. You can play around Kog'Maw. Again, that is a standard composition, but you can also play around this altered Veigar reroll that drops out of the Vex and plays 5 Honeymancer. With high horsepower, you can play around Bastion Ahri. That is the standard way of playing it, or it was, but not anymore. Now the standard way of playing it is playing around Bastion Multistrikers, which was very popular during the PBE, and now has come back for specifically this hero augment. So let's get into each of these, starting off with the somewhat standard compositions. This is Spider Queen. This is the best performing augment of this entire patch. It's pretty much always an auto take. You're looking to play vertical shapeshifters with blasters in the backline. A lot of times you're going to be playing around hunters in the backline until you're able to find Varus plus Smolder. And when it comes to Elise items, you really want Bloodthirster plus Warmogs, and this third item can really be any AP item, but Archangel is the best one. Next up here, we have Kog'Maw Reroll. 2 main hero augments you can play with this, Blitzcrank and Nunu. This is the best in slot for when you are playing these in this particular comp. This is pretty much always best in slot on Blitzcrank, but when it comes to Nunu, you're really looking for BT plus Warmogs, and then that third item is ideally a tank item in this comp. In another comp, it is Archangel, so just keep that in mind. And you are not playing Molten Caramel when it comes to Kog'Maw Reroll. Next up, we have Bastion Ahri. There are 2 main hero augments you can play here. You can play around the Lillia hero augment or the Poppy hero augment. So this is best best in slot for Lillia with BT, Crown Guard plus Ionic. Warmogs is also acceptable, but worse than all of these different items. And then when it comes to poppy items here, a lot of different builds for this. You always want BT, but Sterix, Titans, IE, double healing with Hodge, double healing with 2 BTs. All of those are quite good. And then you just play the composition as normal. Now we start moving into some of the more specific augments, or more the specific compositions for the augment. So this is for Sweet Tooth. This is where you want to play BT plus Warmogs, and then an AP item, ideally Archangel. It's actually pretty much only Archangel. There isn't any acceptable substitute. This Archangel is by far the best item, and you're looking to play 6 Bastion plus 3 Honeymancer. This was actually played quite a bit 2 patches ago, this variation. It went away, now it's coming back again as a popular way of playing Nunu. Here we have the altered version of Veigar reroll. You drop out of the Vex, you play 5 Honeymancer, your primary tank becomes Blitzcrank. It's otherwise identically the same composition, it's just now you're looking to play around Blitzcrank, and also maybe 3-star Kog'Maw if you're uncontested on that unit. Next up we have Molten Caramel with Rumble. So main idea here is you're just looking to play 4 Vanguard with Preservers and reroll Tristana plus Rumble. Tristana will be your backline carry, Rumble is your frontline carry, and if you can, try to go for Mordekaiser 3. And then we have this Lillia line. This is just Bastions with Multistriker, Kalista in the backline. It kind of sucks that you have only one backline unit. That's something you're going to try to fix by leveling up for the Xerath eventually, but until then, this is kind of the main way you're playing it. The big thing here to keep in mind is you want the Crown Guard, or sorry, not the Crown Guard, the Fairy Crown on Lillia and not on Kalista, and you want Kalista to have 3 proper items. So really here you actually don't need that many items in the Lillia. You can go BT plus Crown Guard, which would be ideal. You can also go BT plus Ionic. BT plus really any AP item here is pretty good. And then for Kalista, you want 2 Rageblades, and then this third item is pretty flexible. It can be a GS, could be a Last Whisper, but I believe Runon's is the best. And then lastly here we have Deja Vu. This is playing around double Rageblade plus Gunblade on Galio. JG is acceptable as well, Jeweled Gauntlet. One secret tech that I shared in my last video that I think is quite interesting is if you get this augment called Marksman Toolbox, this build actually works on Galio and is quite good. The main issue with this, of course, is that you really ideally would be able to hit Mordekaiser 3, but in a lot of cases you're not able to, and also the items are very specific. So if you're not able to get best in slot on Galio, I would not take this augment most of the time. All right, finally here we have Upgraded Adventure. This is a prismatic augment that enables 1 new composition, as well as an old one being a little bit better, and that's Bastion Ahri. We've already talked about Bastion Ahri quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but obviously this is one of the best augments you can get for this comp, especially if you're able to hit prismatic ticket on 3-2. You're looking to 3-star the Lillia, 3-star the Ahri, 3-star the Zoe, and 3-star the Poppy, and it is one of the compositions that is definitely capable of winning out. You can also consider picking up Seraphines and going for Seraphine 3 as well, if it looks like RE3 is a little bit further away. And then the more interesting thing here is Nomsy reroll. So with Nomsy reroll, you really want to hit Shyvana 3 and Nomsy 3, of course. Nomsy is going to hold on to your items, not Twitch. And also when it comes to your tank items, they are not going on Elise, they are not going on to Jace, they are going on to Shyvana. Ideally, you're able to hit this Shyvana 3, but you can go for all 4 of these 3-starred, and if you're really far away from Shyvana, and just push levels and try to get Nasus as your primary tank, and maybe secondary tank somebody like Nico or Swain. But ideally, you're able to hit this Shyvana because you're going to have 3 dragon, and with really good items, she can do a lot of damage. What you're looking at right here are her ideal tank items, so Crown Guard, Protector's Vow, and Adaptive. Yes, surprisingly, Adaptive has quite good stats, even though she doesn't cast after transforming, just because the raw stats from the item is actually quite good. So something worth keeping in mind here. And then of course you can go any standard tank items on Shyvana, it's completely fine, but these ones are performing particularly well. Remember that she's not just a tank, she's also sort of a magic carry damage unit. You can see that they say she's a magic fighter, but she will act as a tank until you're able to get to Nasus. But yeah, this composition doing quite well, something to keep in mind. All right, and that is it for this patch guide. Let me know what you thought about the flowchart. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Does it help in terms of understanding when to play different compositions? The only thing I don't like about it right now is that I'm covering the same composition multiple times in the same video. So if you figure out a solution for that one, let me know. But otherwise, I think this is a massive improvement, something I might want to try implementing into more of these patch guides in the future. So yeah, give me some feedback in the comments below. If you're interested in the flowchart, it's available in my Discord, and I'll see you next time.